and talk a little bit about my parents, because they had an incredible influence on the reason I come here today and the reason I talk about the things I do talk about. So my dad's called Tim, and he grew up on a little island called Jersey. It's well known for being a tax haven, but actually my granddad was a fighter pilot in the RAF, who wasn't in finance, like most people there. And after he retired from the RAF, after being in a bad crash where his Hawker Hunter fighter jet was hit on the tail by another Hawker Hunter, and then started to stove into the ground, he ejected out and broke his back. So he retired to commercial flying and flew to the island of Jersey on and off, and discovered it was a lovely place, quite small, but surrounded by great big beaches and perfect for raising a family. So my dad and his brother and sister were brought up there, and they learned to sail from a very early age, first on a wooden mirror dinghy, and then later on a faster boat called a Fireball. And so that immediately put this passion in my dad for a childhood that is very active and adventurous outdoors. He carried that with him. Meanwhile, my mum, Julia, she was born up in Newcastle, and she had the Newcastle accent and everything, which she's now lost, unfortunately, down here. And she had 4 older brothers who were very outdoorsy, and she always felt like she had to keep up. So I don't know, some of the ladies in the room may have older brothers, and there seems to be, if your brother goes and does something, you're very keen to, be seeing that you can do everything that he can do as well. So she was brought up with that kind of mentality, and they met in a boatyard in Shoreham, and it just so happened that they were both going through quite a messy divorce at the time, and they brought with them kids from their other relationships who were quite young, 4 little girls, who then became my 4 older sisters. And they were incredibly outdoorsy, so I felt like I always had to keep up with what they were doing. When they went sailing, I wanted to learn sail. When they went tree climbing or climbing down the mudslide on Newhaven Cliff, I would try and keep up. And my parents would always be telling them off for doing something outrageous, something dangerous. So I was born in Laws Avenue in Newhaven, which is just down the road. It's opposite Cantell's boatyard. And by this point, my parents decided to build a boat together. So they bought some, just the hulls of a classic wooden catamaran, a 2-hulled boat called the Warham Catamaran, designed by a man called James Warham. And they had these 2 hulls, and they took them to Cantell's boatyard, which used to be quite an active working boatyard. It's closed now. And they joined them together with epoxy and metal beams. And when they'd finished, they built this great big duck of a boat that weighed 3 tons. It had 2 stubby little masts, and its maximum speed was around about 14, 15 knots, which is very, very slow for a catamaran.
Usually pretty fast for a yacht.
Yeah. Pretty fast for a yacht. That was downwind, mind you. And the problem with catamarans is they don't point into wind very well. So they spent years building that, and I spent a lot of my childhood tinkering around on Cantell's boatyard, coming up and down the river here, but mostly alone, because they made, I think, what was maybe a foolish decision of sending me to school in Brighton. So I went to a Steiner school there, which is kind of fitted with their alternative ethos. It's one of those schools where they leave the kids and let them do whatever they want, and call them in occasionally to eat some porridge or something. So by the time I was 13, I'd never sat in a science lesson. I had no idea about chemistry or even ancient history. I'd learned only about outdoor play, and I can crochet and I can knit, and I can felt little animal figures. And they finished their boat, and we took it off sailing out of Newhaven Port. It was an incredibly emotional moment. We called up the bridge and had to get them to open the bridge so we could get the boat through, get the mast through. And my 4 sisters stood on the quay there waving, and everyone was crying. Because my parents decided, well, we'll go sailing, we'll just see how far we can get. So they told this Steiner school in Brighton that I was moving school. What they neglected to say was that the school was on a boat which would then be sailing around the world. So there was no paperwork like, how is this boy going to get his education? They just had a whole stack of homeschooling books, which they came wrapped in bubble wrap. And when we got back a year later, we looked under the bunks of our catamaran, and there were the homeschooling books completely wrapped in their bubble wrap. They'd never been out. So on the boat, I spent most of my time fishing and practicing some of the skills that are in the book. So I talk about making your own compass, and building shelters, tying different kinds of knots, all the kind of things that I've just did to pass the time, because it was just me and them on the boat. So after a while, your parents become like part of the furniture. You don't really interact with them. You do your own thing, and they're just there. So a lot of my love and interest in like practical outdoor skills was out of necessity, because I didn't have anyone else around. So it's not a sob story. I think it's amazing how, given 2 or 3 months, you can really become okay with your own company and learn to interact with the environment, and the fish became your friends. And I had a pet seagull on board the boat, and I used to catch fish for it and feed it. And I watched the seagull grow up, and its feathers became all hard, and it learned to fly, and eventually it flew off. But that process alone gave me a huge amount of education. I had to work out how many fish I was going to catch every day to make sure I could feed it. I knew I needed 3 fish a day. I was doing very, very basic arithmetic in my head, which actually accumulated to knowing quite a lot at the end of the year. And when we came back, I went and enrolled at Seaford Head down the road, and I was quite tanned but incredibly short, and they'd all been told that this boy from the Caribbean called Tiger was coming. They have very different impressions of what I would be like. And so I turned up there, and I remember sitting in my first religious education lesson, and it was just, the noise was incredible. Things were flying across the classroom. It's probably because I'd spent all this time in kind of almost sensory deprivation on the boat, where you've got the ocean, and obviously there's land, but there's not so many humans going crazy. And there I was in this classroom in Seaford Head, and I absolutely loved it. All that interaction, just making friends everywhere, the connections between different people. We'd go around to different people's houses, and all of that was novel to me. So the 2 years that I spent there were just wonderful. And I found that I wasn't held back in my studies, because unlike a lot of my peers, I still had a love for learning. I could still listen to the physics lesson about the viscosity of fluids, and I could apply that to stuff that I learned on the boat, mixing the petrol and the oil together for the 2-stroke engine. It all kind of tied together. Whereas a lot of my friends were saying, why are we learning this? When are we ever going to need to know about the viscosity of a fluid? So it all became a lot more applicable, which is why I'm so passionate about young people having these outdoor skills and experiences, and very practical methods of know-how when you're not just outdoors, but just practical ingenuity. I love it when someone gives me a challenge, like I don't know, can you build a tower that's going to reach the ceiling, and we could pile the chairs together and make it work. That's the kind of thing I really adore. So I took that kind of skill set, and I put it into the book and generated a number of ideas. One of those is how to make a magnet, because the Earth's magnetic field is obviously everywhere. That's how our compasses work. And there's quite a fun activity you can do with kids, which I will attempt to demonstrate now. If you take a bowl of water and you fill it up just a little bit to about there, and then you take a pin, just any pinhead, and a magnet. It doesn't have to be a very strong magnet, just say one from the back of the torch, and you hold the pinhead and you wipe it against the magnet like this. Wipe it against the magnet a number of times, and what you're trying to do is magnetize the steel of the pin ever so slightly using the magnet. This is how they make magnets. They highly magnetize them.
Do all torches have magnets?
Yeah. Sorry?
Do all torches have magnets in the bottom end?
No, this one does. As an explorer, you should always carry a very bright torch.
Yeah, I bought 4 of them the other day for the guys at work.
Oh, yeah, really good ones.
With magnets?
With magnets, yeah.
Yeah, the magnets are good.
Just the way you picked up and said, obviously you use the magnet on the bottom of the torch. I've never known torches to have magnets on them.
So you can
use it for a magnet. So then we've got a magnetised needle, and we can take a piece of paper, and what you're looking for is something that's going to float on top of the water there. You can take a small square of paper, and then if we balance the paper on there and the needle on top, what we should end up with in time, there we go, we can tell it's magnetised because it's sticking to that, is it rotating and aligning with the Earth's magnetic field. And then you can get the compass out on your phone. Does anyone have an iPhone with the compass app?
It's that
Could I borrow your compass app, and we'll in a moment, once it's given the chance to rotate on the frictionless surface of the water, we'll see if it's lining up with the Earth's magnetic field.
So is that magnetic north?
Magnetic north. Yeah. Magnetic north.
I do know naturally where north is.
Yeah, it's over there.
It is pointing
in
in
the
The fascinating thing is, these are little doves, and they have magnetic sensor potentially in their nostrils. For a long time, the classic understanding was that they have iron particles in their beak, and this allows them to feel the Earth's magnetic field somehow. But scientists had a look at that, and they thought, right, well, iron particles in your beak, you'd have to have a very, very sensitive beak in order to feel the pull of the incredibly weak magnetic field of the Earth. So I've generated a different theory. Because there's no good evidence to suggest that they do have enough iron in their beak, I was reading a book called Quantum Biology. Have you heard of quantum mechanics?
Yeah.
So it turns out that a lot of animals and plants are using quantum mechanics in their everyday functions. Photosynthesis, for instance, uses a quantum tunnel effect to help transfer the sun's energy into eventually to swap carbon and oxygen out. And I think what's happening here is in the olfactory bulb of trout, they found, so olfactory bulb is the smell organ in our body, that when we smell, there's a quantum mechanical process to do with the spin of particles that happens to help us identify what kind of smell it is. And that is a very, very sensitive reaction, and it is potentially influenced by the Earth's magnetic field. So I think what's happening with these doves, and this is a theory I've generated by myself and I hope will one day be proved, is that they're actually smelling the Earth's magnetic field. It's like they have a sense that we don't have. So when they smell, if the Earth's field is slightly misaligned, they sense it. The fascinating thing about the field, it's not entirely uniform around the Earth. It's like a unique coating, like a skin or a lacquer around the Earth. In certain places it's stronger, in certain places there's magnetic anomalies. And so what you can imagine is, as a pigeon, you could build up a map in your head of this magnetic shapes and the magnetic geography, if you will, and use that to find your way around. Is over here, perhaps there we go. You see I took the scissors away and it's just changed?
Oh, yes, yeah.
And it's coming around more and more to true north, which at the moment is the direction that the... So if you want to do a science project with kids, you can be like, okay, I'll draw a line on the table and I can guarantee you that the needle's going to line up this way, and every time you do it, it will.
And that's why you don't put a radio over the speaker and it makes you a compass on the button.
Exactly, so you can see even the scissors there were affecting our little pin compass. With the European robin, which is much like our favourite bird, the robin. And they had them in a cone like this during the migration season. Passionate about kids learning practical outdoor skills. But you also have to remember we're a Chamber of Commerce, and one of the major incentives for me writing this book is that someone at the Guild of Master Craftsmen Publishers thought the time was ripe to pay someone to write a book about outdoor skills. And so they ended up approaching me and said, we'll pay you to write this book. And I then said yes. So I think there's a big place. The money that I get from selling the book goes into a community interest company, which is a legal structure that means that you work for the benefit of the community while also being able to take out private equity. So you can pay yourself dividends up to a certain amount as long as it goes in with a community interest statement.
1 minute.
Lovely. If you'd like to buy one of the books, come and have a flick through, have a look at the table of contents, and then if there's any, the best age range is around about 8 to 12 years old. Any younger than that, then they won't quite get it. Any older, and they might feel patronised that it says young adventurers on the front.